Welcome back, everyone. Today I want to talk to you about a must-have accessory for your Dreamcast, and that is a VGA box. Now, some of you may be familiar with this one. This is a pretty good quality Japanese-made VGA box. I will say there are some cheap Chinese ones out there. Do not buy those because the quality is terrible. This one I think I paid maybe $30 for about 10 years ago. The prices continue to go up as they do on everything in video games. And I think they're selling for between like $70 and $100 now. I think it's a good VGA box. I don't know that it's worth that much, but there is another option, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. This one has really high build quality and a lot more features to it, and that is the Hanzo VGA box. So let's take a closer look. Okay, so we have our VGA boxes sort of side by side here, and the first thing we'll talk about are the various inputs and outputs. Of course, the inputs can be the same on both of them. These two connectors here will go to your Dreamcast AV out. As far as the VGA side goes, on the standard VGA box, you've got your VGA out and also your 1/8 inch out, like a headphone style thing. This is the first thing I think is better on the Hanzo. You have your VGA out here and you have actual RCA outs for the audio. And I know some people, if you're using like a TV or something like that, the VGA input will have a little 1/8 inch plug next to it. And so you can always convert this if you need to, but I think if you're spending this kind of money on accessories, you're probably going to have a good enough system that you'll want to run the audio elsewhere anyway. So I think that's a definite advantage, and the sound quality is much better. Now, the standard VGA box also has composite and S-video out, which I do like about it. And the funny thing is, even though there's a switch between the VGA and it says PC and TV, so the TV side is supposed to be the S-video and the composite. And even though there's a switch, if you're switched to VGA, you still get S-video output, which is how I record my Dreamcast footage, since I don't have a good way of recording VGA yet. So that's not on here, but the Hanzo does have a switch over here that is between RGB and VGA. This can also be an RGB out, 15 kilohertz, 480i, or it can be a 480p VGA out, which is the way I would recommend using it. The only reason you would want to use the RGB, I think, is if you're putting your Dreamcast into like an arcade cab and you only have 15 kilohertz to use. I think any other application you're going to want to use the VGA. But there is one other interesting thing that it can do, which is if you have it switched to 15 kilohertz, and you know there are some games that actually won't run 480p 31 kilohertz. They only run low res. And so you'll usually get an error message with your standard VGA box, and you'll have to figure out how to either get a boot disk or something of that nature, which is what I had always done. But on this one, you can actually switch it to the RGB, let the game load, and then switch it over, and it will automatically switch over to VGA, no problem. So that's pretty cool. The other thing is the scan lines. This has a scan line generator on it, which is very cool. And you have to remember that when the Dreamcast was made, most of us still had CRT televisions. This was before HD TVs. So the games are designed with that in mind. And it's funny because people normally talk about scan lines when we're talking about 2D games, but some of the 3D games look significantly better with scan lines on them too. So that's what these other three switches do. I'll have to kind of get down here close to see what the things say. So this is the on-off switch here, so that'll turn your scan lines on or off. There's also a width switch, so you can actually, there are two different widths to choose from. And from what I understand, if you're upscaling this to 1080p, sometimes the width can make a difference as far as the scan lines and how they look. And then there's also an even odd switch over here. And those, honestly, my recommendation is just hook it up to whatever your setup is, mess around with the scan lines and see what looks best. I mean, that's really the easiest thing for that. The only thing that I don't like about this thing is you can see there's an LED bulb here. It's a blue LED, and it is like blindingly bright. I mean, it is way, way, way too bright. So, thankfully it's sitting behind the Dreamcast, so you can hopefully like not have to see this, but when you turn it on, you will notice like this thing is horrendously blinding. But yeah, all the features I think are great. It looks fantastic, and they're still making these. I think they're 65 a piece, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think there's anywhere that has them in stock, so you have to pre-order. But still, it's worth the wait. And if it's going to be cheaper than your standard VGA box, I say go for it. So how about let's take a little bit of look at some comparison footage. I'll do like a standard AV out, maybe our standard VGA box, and then the Hanzo with and without scan lines. So let's check it out.
So I figured we'd start with one of the launch titles for the system. This is Soulcalibur, and as you might imagine, the S-Video looks terrible. I suppose it might look a little bit better if you were to upscale it through a FrameMeister or something of that nature, but I don't know why you would do that. So this is just to give you a little bit of a frame of reference. Next is your standard VGA box, which looks pretty good, I'll have to admit. Next up we have our Hanzo VGA box, which doesn't put out quite as bright a signal, and it doesn't look quite as good in the video here, but honestly it looks better than the standard VGA on the actual TV, and I think the slightly dimmer presentation is a lot easier on the eyes, looks really nice. And here we have it with the scan lines, and this doesn't show up very well on the video, but I can assure you that it looks even better with the scan lines, and whether or not you want them, I think is a game-to-game thing, and you just have to kind of try it out for yourself and see what looks best. Next up, we'll take a look at a static picture. This is the title screen from Last Hope Pink Bullets, and hopefully this will help you make a better determination of the differences. We have the S-Video first, we have the VGA next, which is a little on the blurry side, and for some of these games the difference between the standard and the Hanzo VGA box is a little bit of an increase in clarity even without the scan lines. So here we have the Hanzo VGA box without scan lines, and then once we add them, again it's kind of hard to tell the video, you might want to watch it back a couple of times, but it does add a certain amount of clarity, especially on low-res things like this. So here we have an example of a more 2D style game, and a lot of people will tell you that your scan lines will especially look good on 2D games. I think they look good on certain 3D games too. It just depends on the game itself, and again, you just kind of have to try this stuff out for yourself just to see what the difference is. Now the standard VGA again looks pretty good, although it is a little on the bright side, and I'll admit it looks good in the video, but it is a little wearing on the eyes when you see this in real life. So next up we have the Hanzo VGA box, which again is a little bit dimmer, but I think it looks really nice in person. Everything's nice and clear, all your lines are nice and clear. And then once you add the scan lines, especially again on these 2D games, the scan lines I think help add that last touch of clarity, and again it's not all that easy to see in the video, so you'll just have to trust me on that one. Here we have a low-res or 240p game, and that is Last Hope Pink Bullets. And so this is one where you'll really notice the difference in the scan lines, I think, and just the VGA in general looks great on this. But this definite like 2D game, Neo Geo style game here, which of course was originally released for the Neo Geo, looks incredible through the Hanzo box, and especially when you add those scan lines to it. And again, I don't know how well a lot of this stuff shows up on video, so you may have to take my word for it, but it does look incredible. And as I said before, the addition of the scan lines will add that last bit of clarity, especially when you're dealing with 240p titles. Here we have a short clip from the cinematic intro to Gigawing 2. And this looks especially crappy with the S-Video, and this is definitely a 480p title. And you'll notice a huge difference when we switch over to the VGA. And I'll have you take a look just at the clarity of the lines here, because you can tell a difference between the standard VGA box and the Hanzo VGA, even with the scan lines turned off. I think there's definitely much cleaner lines here, and the presentation is just really lovely. And this is one of those cases too where if you turn on the scan lines, it does add a little bit of clarity to it. And I know that it's a 3D game and it's not supposed to matter, but it really does look amazing on the television. Next up we have Gunbird 2. And something I didn't mention before was that if you plug S-Video into an HD TV, you're also going to get lots of input lag. And it makes a game like this almost unplayable, to be honest with you. And add to that, if you're using the tape mode like I am now, except not actually turning the television, then it becomes extra fun. And this is probably the hardest way to play the game when you've got the D-pad sideways and tons of input lag. So yeah, if you're a serious masochist, I highly recommend doing it that way. So this is a standard VGA box here, and again, everything looks nice, but it's a little bit clearer through the Hanzo VGA, and then the scan lines, especially on this one, look really good, being that this is a low-res 2D game, and that's the main place where you're going to use those scan lines. I also tried to capture some footage a little bit closer up here, and that's to try to give you a little bit more detail. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell how well it's coming across, but at any rate, yeah, I played this opening stage 8 times just for you guys, so you're welcome. At any rate, the S-Video, of course, looks terrible. You can see with the closer up shot here that the standard VGA box does look a little blurry around some of the edges here. Especially some of these turrets coming up, when you see they kind of rise up there. And again, it looks good on the screen, but it's just not quite as clear as the Hanzo. So when it comes up here, you can kind of take a look and see how much clearer it is, even without the scan lines. And I think yeah, there we go. I think the Hanzo box is just such a superior signal. and everything just looks incredible, like I said, even without the scan lines. And then once you add those in, it kind of adds just a little bit more clarity, which again, I don't know if it's going to come through on the video or not, but it is certainly there, and amazing. Now that is the thing of beauty right there. And you can see on that little guy on the ground there just how clean everything is, and it's just really pixel perfect. Again, when these turrets come up, you can kind of take a look at those. If you want to go back and look at the other ones, those are a good indicator of just how much better this is. Our final comparison here is Gigawing 2. This is the first boss battle. And again, the S-Video looks terrible, the VGA looks pretty good, the Hanzo VGA looks great, and the Hanzo with scan lines looks incredible. And you can see I died just there a second ago because the input lag was just really killing me here. So anyway, I think this box is well worth the money. And, you know, if you've put the money into a Dreamcast and the games already, you may as well get the best picture out of it you can, and this is definitely the way to go. So all in all, I think it's a great investment, and definitely something worth checking out. So as always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.